I don't want to be a father. Children make you vulnerable.
What? Vulnerable? How can you say that?
They do. I won't risk it.
This is insane.
Get rid of the baby.
No, I'm keeping it.
Why?
Because it's my choice. Why won't you just talk to me?
Because there's nothing to say.
That's not true.
Just leave it.
The playground was alive with the sound of children's laughter, but Kang Junseo heard only silence. His fingers gripped the iron fence so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Across the sandbox, two identical boys with dark hair and sharp features threw a ball back and forth, their faces splitting into matching grins. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old, and they looked exactly like him. His breath caught in his throat. The world tilted sideways. Then a woman appeared, moving between the boys with practiced ease, her hands reaching out to steady the smaller one as he stumbled. Junseo's heart stopped. Hana. Older now, her hair shorter, her face carrying a hardness that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably her. She must have felt his stare because her head turned sharply. Their eyes met across 30 feet of distance. Recognition flashed in her expression, followed immediately by something else. Fear. Without a word, she gathered both boys close, one hand on each small shoulder, and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Stay away. Junseo stood frozen long after they disappeared from view, his mind spinning backward through 4 years of carefully constructed justifications, tumbling past the walls he'd built around that one terrible night. 4 years earlier, the apartment had been small and cold, despite the radiator rattling in the corner. Hana sat on the edge of the worn sofa, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. The pregnancy test sat on the coffee table between them, 2 pink lines that might as well have been prison bars. "I'm keeping it," she said quietly. Not a question. A statement. Junseo leaned against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed, his face carefully blank. He'd spent the last 2 hours after her phone call preparing for this conversation, running through scenarios, calculating outcomes. His work didn't allow for complications. Children were complications. "No," he said. The word came out flat, final. "You're not." Hana looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for something she wouldn't find. "Junseo, this is our child. We can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out." He pushed away from the counter, but didn't move closer to her. Distance was important. Distance meant control. "I don't want a child. I've been clear about that from the beginning." "Things change," she said, and he heard the tremor in her voice now, the first crack in her composure. "People change. I won't." He cut her off, his tone sharpening. "Get rid of it, Hana. I'll pay for the procedure. I'll pay for whatever you need afterward. But I will not be a father." She stood up slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. "What if it's yours?" The question hung between them, heavy with all the things she wasn't saying. "What if you're making a mistake? What if you regret this? What if I need you?" Junseo turned away from her, staring at the dark window that reflected only shadows. "Then it's better off not existing. My life isn't built for children. You know what I do. You know the kind of people I work with. You could leave that life." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You don't leave my life. You don't understand what you're asking." "Then help me understand." Her voice broke on the last word. "Tell me why our child has to die, because you're afraid." "I'm not afraid." He spun to face her, anger flashing across his features. "I'm being realistic, practical. A child would make me vulnerable, weak. It would give my enemies leverage. Do you want to raise a child who grows up as a target? Who gets used to hurt me?" "Or maybe," Hana said softly, "you're just selfish." The words landed like a slap. Junseo's jaw tightened. "Get out." "What?" "If you're going to keep it, then we're done. Get out. I don't want to see you again." Hana stared at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. But she didn't beg. She didn't scream. She simply nodded once, picked up her jacket from the chair, and walked to the door. Her hand was on the knob when she paused. "You're going to regret this," she said, not looking back. "Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day, you'll understand what you threw away." The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like thunder. Junseo stood alone in the empty apartment, telling himself he'd done the right thing. The necessary thing. He had plans, ambitions that stretched far beyond domestic life and diapers. He was 28 years old, and already climbing the ranks of one of Seoul's most powerful crime families. Children would only hold him back. He poured himself a drink and pushed all thoughts of Hana from his mind. Over the following weeks, he heard nothing from her. No angry phone calls, no tearful messages, just silence. Part of him was relieved. Part of him wondered, in the small hours of the morning when sleep wouldn't come, whether she'd gone through with it, whether the problem had been solved. He told himself it didn't matter either way. Junseo threw himself into his work with renewed focus. The organization needed men who could make hard choices, who wouldn't hesitate when hesitation meant death. He proved himself in ways that left blood on his conscience and respect in his reputation. By the time 6 months had passed, he'd been promoted twice. By a year, he was running his own crew. Power accumulated like snow in winter, quiet and inexorable. Junseo learned to read the subtle language of fear in men's eyes, to calculate the exact amount of pressure needed to break someone's will without breaking their usefulness. He acquired wealth, influence, connections that stretched from the docks to the corporate boardrooms. His penthouse apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive art on the walls, and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year. It was beautiful and cold and perfectly empty. He told himself he was happy. He told himself he'd made the right choice. But sometimes, walking through the streets on his way to a meeting, he'd hear children laughing in a nearby playground, and something would twist in his chest. He'd quicken his pace, focus on his phone, push the feeling down deep where it couldn't touch him. 3 years after Hana left, Junseo sat in an exclusive restaurant with his boss, Kim Tae-jun, a man in his 60s who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and strategic brutality. "You've done well," Tae-jun said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. "Better than I expected, if I'm honest. You're smart. Efficient. You don't let emotions cloud your judgment." "Thank you, sir. But you're lonely." It wasn't a question. Junseo kept his expression neutral. "I have everything I need." "You have nothing." Tae-jun set down his knife and fork, studying Junseo with the intensity of a man who'd spent decades reading people. "I see it in you. The same emptiness I lived with for years. You think power is enough. You think money is enough. It's not. Respectfully, sir, I'm content with my life. I had 3 children," Tae-jun continued, as if Junseo hadn't spoken. "Lost 2 of them to this life. The third won't speak to me. I have all the power in the world, and no one to leave it to. No one who cares whether I live or die beyond what they can gain from it." Junseo shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of myself at your age, and because I wish someone had told me the truth back then." Tae-jun leaned forward. "This life takes everything. It's designed that way. By the time you realize what you've lost, it's too late to get it back." The conversation haunted Junseo for days afterward, but he pushed it aside. Tae-jun was old, sentimental. Things were different now. Junseo didn't need a family. He had purpose. He had control. Then came the day in the park. After Hana disappeared with the twins, Junseo stood at the fence for nearly an hour, his mind racing. They were alive. His children were alive. She hadn't terminated the pregnancy. She'd carried them to term, raised them alone, built a life without him. And they were his. He'd seen it in their faces, in the shape of their eyes, the way they moved. Identical boys. Twins. The weight of it crashed over him like a wave. He'd spent 4 years convincing himself the chapter was closed, the decision final. But it had never been final for Hana. She'd been living with the consequences of his choice every single day, while he climbed his ladder of power and pretended the past didn't exist. That night, Jun Seo sat in his penthouse with a bottle of whiskey and made a decision. He would fix this. He had resources now. Power, money. He could provide for them in ways he couldn't have 4 years ago. He could protect them. He could be a father. The thought terrified him more than any violence he'd committed in the name of the organization. Finding Hana's address took 3 phone calls. Junseo stared at the information his contact provided, guilt twisting in his stomach. She lived in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions. Smart. She'd deliberately chosen obscurity. He didn't go to the address immediately. Instead, he spent 2 days planning his approach. Showing up unannounced seemed aggressive. Calling seemed cowardly. Finally, he settled on a letter. Something she could read in private. Something that gave her control over whether to respond. He sat at his desk for hours, pen in hand, struggling to find words that didn't sound hollow or self-serving. Every sentence felt inadequate. How did you apologize for telling someone to terminate a pregnancy? How did you explain that you'd changed, that you wanted to be involved now? In the end, his letter was short. Hana, I saw you and the boys in the park. I know they're mine. I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I said, after what I did. But I want to be in their lives. I want to help. I want to try. Please give me a chance. Until he included his phone number and sent the letter by courier, marked private and confidential. Days passed. Then a week. His phone remained silent. On the 10th day, an envelope arrived at his office. No return address. Inside was his letter, unopened, with 3 words written on the front in Hana's handwriting. Stay away. The rejection stung more than he'd expected. Junseo crumpled the envelope, then smoothed it out again, staring at her handwriting. She didn't want his apology. She didn't want his money. She wanted him gone. But he couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not when he knew they existed. He started watching from a distance, careful to never get too close, never be obvious. He learned their names from overheard conversations in the playground. Minjai and Minho. The boys attended a local preschool 3 days a week. Hana worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. They lived simply, but seemed happy. Junseo bought gifts he never delivered. A stuffed animal sat in his car for 2 weeks before he finally donated it to a charity. Matching toy cars gathered dust on his coffee table. He told himself he was preparing for when Hana changed her mind, when she'd let him in. Deep down, he knew he was holding on to ghosts of what might have been. One evening, he sat in his car across from their apartment building, watching lights flicker on in windows as families settled in for the night. Hana appeared in the window of her unit, visible for just a moment as she closed the curtains. Something about the gesture felt final, like a door closing. His phone rang. It was one of his lieutenants, needing approval for a deal. Junseo handled it automatically, his responses mechanical. When he hung up, he noticed a black, sudden park down the street, 2 men inside watching Hana's building. Ice flooded his veins. They were his men. He'd assigned them to keep an eye on the neighborhood, to make sure Hana and the boys were safe. But looking at them now, seeing the situation through her eyes, he realized how it must look. Strange cars, men watching, the specter of his world creeping closer to her door. He called the sedan immediately. Pull back. Leave now. Sir? I said leave. End the surveillance. But the damage was done. The next day, when he drove past the preschool during pickup time, Hana wasn't there. Another woman collected the twins, someone he didn't recognize. His chest tightened. 3 days later, he tried to visit her workplace. The receptionist told him, with a carefully neutral expression, that Hana no longer worked there. She'd resigned without notice. Panic set in. Junseo used every resource at his disposal to track her movements. Credit cards, phone records, anything that would give him a trail. Everything came back empty. She'd gone dark. She knows, his contact told him over the phone. She knows who you are and what you're capable of. She's scared. I would never hurt them. You already did. 4 years ago. And now you're stalking her. How is that better? The words hit like a physical blow. Junseo ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the photos he'd printed from his surveillance. Minjae and Minho, laughing in the playground. Hana, her face tired but content, holding their hands. A family he'd never been part of. A family he was now destroying by proximity. What he didn't know was that Hana had been preparing for this moment since the day in the park. She'd spent 4 years living with the possibility that Junseo might find them someday. She'd researched lawyers who specialized in domestic violence and organized crime victims. She'd documented everything she knew about his activities, careful to never do anything that would draw attention, waiting for the day she might need leverage. When she saw him at the fence, when she saw the recognition in his eyes, she activated her plan. The lawyer she met with was a woman named Park Mi-sun, whose firm had successfully protected dozens of witnesses and victims from dangerous individuals. He hasn't threatened you directly? Mi-sun asked, reviewing Hana's documentation. No, but his men have been watching my apartment, following me. I've seen the same cars 3 times this week. And you're certain he's involved with organized crime? Hana slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of news articles, police reports, everything she'd collected over the years. Kang Junseo's name appeared multiple times in connection with investigations that never quite led to charges. Businesses that were fronts for illegal activities. Associates who disappeared or died in suspicious circumstances. Mi-sun's expression grew grim as she read. This is good. More than enough. If you want full protection, we can get you into witness protection. He hasn't committed a crime against me. You're the mother of his children, and you fear for their safety due to his criminal associations. That's enough. Especially if you're willing to testify about what you know. Hana hesitated. Testifying meant exposing Junseo, potentially destroying him. Part of her still remembered the man she'd loved before ambition and violence had consumed him. But a larger part of her thought of Minjae and Minho, their innocent faces, their laughter. They deserved better than to grow up in the shadow of their father's choices. What would protection look like? New identities for all 3 of you. Relocation, probably overseas. Financial support until you're established. And legal barriers preventing anyone, including the father, from finding you. He'll try. Let him try. The law may be slow, but it's thorough. And men like Kang Junseo are used to buying their way out of problems. This is one problem money won't solve. Hana signed the papers that afternoon. Over the next 2 weeks, while Junseo frantically searched for any trace of her, Hana systematically erased their existence from Seoul. She withdrew the boys from preschool, citing a family emergency. She terminated her lease early, paying the penalty without complaint. She said goodbye to the few friends she'd made, offering vague explanations about a job opportunity abroad. Everything they owned fit into 4 suitcases. The night before they left, Hana stood in the empty apartment, holding Minjae and Minho's hands. The boys were confused, excited by the adventure, too young to understand the finality of what was happening. Are we coming back, Mama? Minjae asked, his small voice echoing in the bare room. No, sweetheart. We're starting a new adventure somewhere else. Will we see our friends? You'll make new friends. Better friends. Minho tugged on her sleeve. What about the man at the park? The one who was watching us? Hana's heart stopped. What man? The sad man. By the fence. He looked like us. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with her sons. You won't see him again, I promise. Was he bad? The question pierced her. How did you explain to 4-year-olds that their father had rejected them before they were born? That his presence in their lives would only bring danger? That sometimes love meant staying away? He's just sad, she said finally. And sometimes, sad people need to stay away, so they don't make others sad too. The boys seemed to accept this, their attention already drifting to thoughts of airplanes and new places. Hana held them close, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling the solid warmth of their small bodies. She'd protected them this long. She'd protect them forever, even from their father. Junseo didn't know they were gone until 3 weeks after they'd disappeared. He'd exhausted every contact, burned through favors and goodwill trying to find them. Finally, a detective he'd worked with in the past agreed to look into it quietly. The man's expression when they met told Junseo everything he needed to know before a word was spoken. She's gone, the detective said, sliding a folder across the table. Witness protection program. New identities for her and the kids. They're not even in the country anymore. Junseo's hands shook as he opened the folder. The documentation was minimal. Hana had testified to prosecutors about his organization, providing enough information to earn protection without burning him directly. Smart. Merciful, even. She could have destroyed him completely. Instead, she'd built a wall he couldn't climb over, dig under, or break through. Where? His voice came out hoarse. I don't know. No one does. That's the point of the program. The records are sealed. The new identities are generated and monitored by federal agencies. If you try to find them, you'll expose them to danger, which will trigger additional charges against you. This is insane. They're my children. The detective's face hardened. You told her to get rid of them. You abandoned her when she was pregnant. You have no legal claim to those boys. I can get a lawyer. Fight this. With what argument? That you, a known criminal, should have access to children you rejected and whose mother fears you. No judge in the country will rule in your favor. You'd only succeed in making their protection more intense, burying them deeper. Junseo slumped back in his chair, the folder falling from his nerveless fingers. I just wanted to help them, to make up for what I did. Then leave them alone. That's the help they need from you. The words echoed in his head long after the meeting ended. He sat in his car outside the detective's office, staring at nothing, feeling the full weight of his choices crushing down on him. He'd spent 4 years building an empire, accumulating power, proving he was strong, untouchable, above the weaknesses that destroyed lesser men. And in the process, he'd lost the only things that actually mattered. Minjai and Minho, his sons. He didn't even know their middle names, didn't know their favorite colors, or what made them laugh. Didn't know if they were good sleepers or picky eaters. He knew nothing about them except that they looked like him, and that he'd sent them away before they'd even had a chance to exist in his world. Junseo drove home in a daze. His penthouse felt more empty than ever, the expensive furniture suddenly seeming like props in a stage play. None of it was real. None of it meant anything. He walked to his liquor cabinet, poured a drink, then set it down untouched. Getting drunk wouldn't change anything. Nothing would change anything. In the following months, Junseo went through the motions of his life, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. His subordinates noticed the change. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He still made decisions, still ran his operations with ruthless efficiency, but the fire had gone out. Kim Tai-jun called him in for a meeting 6 months after Hana disappeared. You're a liability now, the old man said bluntly. Distracted, unfocused. Men in our business can't afford that. I'm handling my responsibilities. Barely. You used to be sharp, hungry. Now you're just going through the motions. Tae-jun leaned forward. What happened? Junseo could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he told the truth. I had children, twin boys. I didn't know about them until recently. Their mother took them somewhere I can't follow. Tae-jun was silent for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, sad and knowing. I warned you this life takes everything. You're learning the hard way. I don't know how to live with this. You don't have a choice, but you can decide whether to keep destroying yourself or find another path. What path? They're gone. Then honor them by becoming someone they could have been proud of. Not this. Tae-jun gestured at the room, at the empire they'd built on blood and fear. Something better. The conversation planted a seed, though it took time to grow. Junseo started pulling back from the organization gradually, carefully. You couldn't just walk away from this life, but you could make yourself less essential, delegate more, create distance. It took 2 years of strategic maneuvering before he was finally free. He moved out of Seoul, settled in a small coastal town where no one knew his name or his past. He took up woodworking, of all things, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of creating something with his hands. Tables, chairs, toys for the local preschool. He never married, never tried to replace what he'd lost. How could he? But every year, on what he calculated must be the twins' birthday, he drove back to Seoul and sat on a bench in the park where he'd seen them that one time. He'd watch families play, fathers pushing their sons on swings, mothers wiping away tears after scraped knees. He'd sit there for hours, imagining what Minjae and Minho might look like now. Would they still be identical? Or would small differences have emerged? Did they play sports? Excel in school? Did they ever wonder about their father? Or had Hana told them he was dead? On their 10th birthday, Junseo brought a cake to the park. He set it on the bench beside him, lit the candles, and sang happy birthday quietly to children who would never hear him. An elderly woman walking past gave him a strange look, but he didn't care. "I'm sorry," he whispered when the candles burned down. "I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to choose you. I thought power would protect me from pain, but all it did was guarantee I'd lose you." The wind picked up, scattering the smoke from the extinguished candles. Junseo kept the photograph from the park folded in his wallet, the edges worn from being handled too many times. Some nights, he'd take it out and stare at those two small faces, memorizing every detail. Minjae had been wearing a blue shirt. Minho's was red. Or maybe it was the other way around. He wasn't sure anymore. The not knowing was its own special torture. They were out there somewhere, growing up, learning to ride bikes and read books and all the 1,000 small milestones of childhood. And he was here, frozen in the moment of recognition, replaying that single glimpse of his sons, over and over, like a film stuck in a projector. He thought about Tae-jun sometimes, the old man's warning about what this life took from you. Tae-jun had died 3 years after their conversation, surrounded by wealth and power and utterly alone. At his funeral, Junseo had counted less than a dozen people, most of them business associates fulfilling obligations. Was that his future too? Growing old with nothing but regrets and what-ifs. Junseo started volunteering at the local community center, helping kids with homework. It wasn't the same. It could never be the same. But when a 7-year-old boy showed him a drawing of a dragon, beaming with pride, something in Junseo's chest loosened just a little. "That's really good," he said, and meant it. "My dad taught me to draw," the boy said. "Do you have kids?" The question shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. "No, but I wish I did." "Why don't you?" "Because I made mistakes. Big ones. And sometimes you don't get second chances. The boy considered this with the seriousness only children could muster. My dad says everyone deserves second chances. Your dad sounds like a good man. He is. The boy grinned. You could be a good dad too. You just have to try. If only it were that simple. Years accumulated like dust. Junseo's hair started going gray at the temples. His hands, once steady as stone, developed a slight tremor. He was 41 years old, and sometimes it felt like he'd already lived 3 lifetimes. The box of things he'd bought for Minjai and Minho sat in the back of his closet, untouched. The toy cars, now vintage, a book about constellations he'd planned to read to them, 2 identical stuffed bears with red ribbons around their necks. Sometimes he opened the box just to remind himself they were real, that he hadn't imagined them. On what he calculated was their 13th birthday, Junseo sat on his usual bench in Seoul, watching a father teach his teenage son to play guitar. The boy was clumsy, his fingers fumbling over the strings, but his father was patient, demonstrating the chord progression over and over without frustration. Junseo wondered if Minjai and Minho played instruments, if they were good students, if they were happy. He hoped they were happy. That was the only thing that made any of this bearable. A woman sat down on the other end of the bench, an older woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. She watched the father and son for a moment, then turned to Junseo. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "The way he's teaching him." "Yes." "Do you have children?" The question never got easier. I do. Somewhere. The woman's expression softened. "Lost custody?" "Lost everything. Because I was too afraid to be a father when it mattered. It's never too late to change. Sometimes it is." Junseo's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Sometimes you lose people, and no amount of changing brings them back. Then you honor them by being better than you were, for others." It was almost exactly what Taijun had said all those years ago. Junseo nodded slowly. The woman stood to leave, pausing to rest her hand briefly on his shoulder. "The fact that you're here, that you remember, that you care, that matters, even if they never know it." After she left, Junseo sat alone with his memories and his regrets. The guitar music drifted across the park, slightly off-key but earnest. Someone's phone rang in the distance. A child shrieked with laughter. Life went on around him while he remained stuck in amber, preserved in the moment he'd chosen power over love. The photograph in his wallet was fading now, the colors bleeding together. He could barely make out the details anymore, but he didn't need to see it to remember. Minjae's grin, slightly wider than his brother's. Minho's hand reaching for Hana's. The way they'd both turned to look at something off camera, their profiles catching the light. His sons. Forever 4 years old in his memory, forever out of reach. Junseo closed his eyes and made the same prayer he made every year, knowing it would never be answered, but unable to stop himself. Let them be happy. Let them be safe. Let them never know the darkness their father walked through. Let them have everything I couldn't give them. Let them be better than me. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Families packed up their picnic baskets and called their children. The park slowly emptied. Junseo remained on the bench, a solitary figure in the gathering dark, haunted by the ghost of a choice he could never unmake. He'd thought that rejecting his children would make him stronger. Instead, it had broken something fundamental inside him, something that couldn't be repaired with money or power or time. The empire he'd built had crumbled. The respect he'd commanded had faded, but the loss remained, constant and crushing. He didn't lose his children because he wasn't powerful enough. He lost them because he hadn't wanted them when it mattered, because he'd been too afraid, too selfish, too convinced that his ambitions were more important than their existence. And now they were gone. Not dead, which would have been its own terrible finality. Just gone. Alive somewhere in the world, breathing and laughing and growing up without him. Close enough to exist, far enough to be unreachable. It was, Junseo had come to realize, the perfect punishment. More brutal than any prison sentence. More final than any death. He would live the rest of his life knowing his sons were out there, knowing he'd never see them again, knowing that every milestone they reached, every triumph they celebrated, every moment of joy they experienced would happen in a world he'd deliberately excluded himself from. The darkness deepened. Stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that hung over wherever Minjai and Minho were tonight. Junseo stood slowly, his joints protesting. He was getting older. One day, he'd sit on this bench and never stand up again. And when he died, he'd die alone, carrying the weight of his greatest failure into whatever came next. He walked back to his car, each step heavy with regret. Behind him, the empty park bench waited in the shadows, silent witness to a grief that would never end. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and go through the motions of living. He'd work his woodworking job, volunteer with the kids at the community center, eat dinner alone while the television played. He'd survive another day without his sons, and the day after that, he'd do it again, and again, and again, because that was his sentence, not death, not redemption, just the endless, grinding awareness of everything he'd thrown away, stretching out before him into a lonely, childless future. The car engine started with a quiet rumble. Junseo pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the park behind. But he'd be back next year, and the year after that. He'd keep coming back until his body gave out, holding vigil for children who would never know he was there. It was the only thing he had left, the only way to honor the connection he'd severed before it had ever truly existed. The road ahead stretched dark and empty. Junseo drove toward a home that wasn't really home, carrying the weight of two small boys who looked just like him but would never bear his name. This was his life.